Welcome to Presence, a global conversation for a new earth.
And hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 in our series on Christianity is Declining, and it's about time. Glad to have everybody with us here today. Today, I'm actually recording this right this moment, September the 15th, 2021. You'll be receiving this on September 16th for the most part. There are some of those in the Southern Hemisphere, like our board chairman, who may be after midnight. But the point I'm making is this. Danae got a text today with a picture. Really, I thought, I got to share this. Danae was in an Enneagram class, and she met someone who had come from Indiana to the class. His name is Seth Creekmore. Seth is a musician, singer, and so she meets someone from Indiana. Okay. He then listens to our podcasts and has been out to the house here in Atlanta a few times, and we've become real good friends. The picture that was sent is that Seth was invited to sing at a wedding in Winterthur, Switzerland. It just so happens that one of our board members, Marcus Moseman, lives in Winterthur, Switzerland. And so this morning, they send Danae a picture. There's Seth. He goes by Creek, Seth Creekmore. There's Creek and Marcus sitting at the creperie, owned and operated by Marcus and his wife, Christina. And there they are, and they're sending a text over our way. So there's some real interesting things that happen, but it really does show that communication, messages, people who are connecting, these things are happening, and it really does make you sense that this is a small world and that we are very much interconnected in it. So I want to give a shout out to those guys, and especially the reason I brought up the date is that today, even though you're getting it on the 16th, while I'm recording this today on the 15th, today is Marcus Moseman's birthday. So I want to say happy birthday, Marcus. I hope all is well over there. Okay, so last week, I talked about all the statistics, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that today as we move along. Again, I don't know how long the series is going to go. We've got all fall. And it's current events. And I feel like we need to take these models and paradigms and these messages that are just full throughout the biblical narrative, bring them to play within the current events of our lives, no matter where we live on this planet. It is truly a global conversation. It's been heading this way ever since the beginning. So of all the stats that I quoted and all the things that were being done, I had left toward the end there with a podcast that's being done by Tripp Fuller, Brian McLaren, and Diana Butler Bass, all of whom are very prominent speakers and writers and podcasters within Christianity. And the title of their episode was, "Oh God, What Now? Christianity 20 Years After 9/11. Now, the very fact that they're looking at Christianity after 9/11 and what's been happening in Christianity for the last 20 years and all the changes and all the chaos and all of the stats they're quoting about the decline of it, all of their conversation is on the basis of time. What's happened in the last 20 years. As I said earlier, as I go through this, I'll be pulling from time to time 3 different spans of time into this discussion. The first 1,500 years CE, reflective of, in the West, a traditional era level of consciousness as applied to Christology, interpreted as the Holy Roman Catholic Church and the traditional era. Then the second span is the last 500 years since Luther and the complete Protestant movement, and then especially this last 20 years, which has seen the advent of postmodernity and all of the current event conversations, controversial, challenging, etc., are in relation to conflicts between postmodern values of ultimate concern and the values of ultimate concern, most especially with those who are still in a center of gravity that is traditional level, but also a conflict with the previous level, which is modernity, and their values of ultimate concern as well. Because all three levels bring values of ultimate concern, and when you first experience them, you are more in a rejection mode of everything else. It's not until you get to a place where you can finally see ways in which these values can all be integrated, therefore the term integral consciousness, so that you are not constantly trashing and downplaying and demonizing and scapegoating someone whose values of ultimate concern actually belong to traditionalism instead of postmodernism or instead of modernism. So anyway, in this podcast, the three of them, Tripp, Brian, and Diana, are quoting these stats, and the stats are divided up into like Catholic versus Protestant, or mainline versus evangelical, or the United States versus Europe, that kind of thing. And I'm not going to go through all of these statistics, but I want to look at what's behind the statistics and what it's telling us about the form, the institution, Christianity. Because we could do all kinds of stats here, and we could slice and dice this thing in numerous ways. I mean, we could look at how many people are Calvinist versus Arminian, or we could take the last 20 years of postmodernity that has brought into play the LGBTQ community, which had been in previous eras very much excluded, and now included as a value of ultimate concern, inclusion, postmodern inclusion. That's a good value. Now the question is, how does that inclusion work? In the Methodist Church, which we've referred to before within the last couple of years, the postmodern Methodists have included LGBTQ as part of the participating Methodist Christians, whereas the traditional level of consciousness applied to traditional Methodism have not, and therefore the Methodist Church split. And this has been the history of what happens over time. We could go to women's roles. We could go to women versus men in terms of authoritarian hierarchies, because it's still very much controlled by authoritarian men, hierarchies, who are given the power to determine the three words I introduced last week: dogma, doctrine, and creed, all of which are words that relate to boundary-driven thinking and therefore the boundaries of one's Christian identity. Christian identity. So here we have a discussion about the church. And people like to talk about the church. What is the state of the union regarding the church? Well, there are only hundreds of iterations called church, because there is no such thing as the church. again, Catholic, Protestant, mainline, evangelical, etc., etc. We can go down the list hundreds of times. All of them separated, denominated, and Christian identity is based upon one's denomination. If you meet someone and through a very careful conversation, maybe on a plane or somewhere else, you find out you're both Christians, then the next thing you want to navigate is, where do you go to church? Because Christianity is a religion divided. And when Christians go to church, in most cases, they have to pass by X number of other churches on the way. Christianity, if it is an identity, it is an identity divided. I've even had friends who have attempted to do house church. And the thought from that is, well, if we could just get just a few families that know each other real well, we're all close, and we all share these same thoughts and understandings, and if we could just get a little group, we could have a house church, and we could have true, deep fellowship, and we could get out of these larger battles of division, etc., that take place within other parts of Christianity. And in these cases that I'm aware of, and I'm not saying this is true, I mean, I don't know what the state of the union is. I don't have the statistics on how many house churches are out there, but I'm saying from personal experience, and the people I know and the people with whom I've had discussions, they have said, no, our house church broke up. And there's a list of reasons why even that could not hold together. So what I'm saying is if there's podcasters who are still clinging to Christian identity, and they're looking at statistics that can categorize all of the various divisions within that Christianity and which divisions are hurting the worst and which are declining the most, and is there a division out there somewhere that's got a little bit of an uptick to it that we could get excited about? If that's the conversation, then that should be telling us that there's something wrong. Now, that's important because if we're talking about the decline of Christianity, the first thing you want to know, right, is, are we talking about something here that's a disaster? Are we talking about something that we've got to find a way to once again reform? Or can we say it's about time that the evolution of consciousness in first tier, that a model like spiral dynamics researches, diagrams, and shows as a social science through developmental history, historical era after another, has all these first-tier stages that first appear. And then you get up to postmodernity, it's the last level. It's the last level of first tier. Once you do the evolutionary leap into integral, you have entered into a different way of processing values of ultimate concern, and your thinking moves from the particular to the universal, and you're seeing all human beings as the same. You're not thinking particularistically. And so it would seem logical, but that's to me, and to you who are followers of presence, that this movement, this decline, is actually just a decline in the various attempts to make Christology an institutional religion. That for 2,000 years, Christology has been interpreted as a traditional institution, a modern institution, a postmodern institution, and we're saying, what if the intent of God's work through Christ and through Christology was to transform the world into that which transcends institution, that which transcends form, that which transcends human self as source of the identity, of God identity. In previous podcasts, as I thought about this, I've talked about Paul and Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, and when he asked them, is Christ divided? That was his question to them. 2,000 years ago, Paul asked that question, is Christ divided? That was supposed to be a rhetorical question. The answer to that was supposed to be, of course not. Of course not. For Paul, it was obvious because Christology for him was the transformational work of God. It was a God work. How does one divide God's work to deliver a creation whose identity is an all-in-all identity of God and God nature? So this was what it was for Paul. For Paul, God as source was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, herself, itself. God reconciling the world to God. It was God that brought about the restoration of all things, not some things, but God restoring all things, and God, and only God, that Paul then saw as all in all. I also thought about a conversation I had with Dad when we lived in Colorado. We spent 4 years in Colorado Springs, and Danae and I lived in a villa next door to Mom and Dad's villa. And every day, for the most part, every day I would go from the lower level of our villa where my office was, through my sliding glass door, walk out over my patio into the grass of a commonly shared backyard, around into the patio of his lower level, through the glass door there, and right into his office. And I would sit down, and every day we would talk about the biblical narrative. Every day. It wasn't because we were in a church. We weren't. It wasn't because we belonged to an institution. We didn't. And it wasn't because we were calling ourselves Christian. But yet we had a desire to sit down every day and talk from the biblical narrative about its application to our lives and to the world. I want to emphasize that because moving into a post-Christian realm is not the abandonment of the narrative. And I will reemphasize this again and again to make sure people understand that, yes, Christianity is a necessary step in the direction toward Christology as a transformative work of God versus an institution, and that there are, we understand, billions that are still checking the box called Christian, even though there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different kinds of Christians. These are all steps forward. This is all part of an evolutionary process. So I had this conversation with Dad about identity. And Dad made this statement to me. He's always coming up with these insights, but he very much studying in depth Paul, did a lot of work with Paul. And he said, Doug, Paul would never have accepted Christ if he had not seen Christ as the way God as source was restoring and reconciling. This was the God of Paul's narrative. Paul, studying at the feet of Gamaliel, growing up in the narrative of Abraham, who was called by God. The same God for Paul, who in the beginning created. The same God for Paul, who spoke, "Let there be light." The same God who in times past spoke through the prophets. The same God who in the last days spoke through his Son. It was God who spoke. It was God who created. It was God who called. For Paul, he understood, as did all Israel, "Hear ye, the Lord our God is one." There was a Son who came to play a role and function. That role and function was revelatory. It was a transformative role and function. But for Paul, the source was always God. And if we look at this discussion of time, and I take all these time spans into consideration, going all the way back to the first century and looking at the last couple thousand years here, division has increased as Christianity has evolved. Think about that. Division has increased as Christianity has evolved, which to me means that because Christology was interpreted by the Gentiles in Rome after Jesus left the scene, after the apostles left the scene, when they were in Rome and they were sitting there in the middle of the blue meme traditional era, and they saw everything through a lens of empire and institution, as in Roman Empire, and the need for a unifying religious institution. So began the interpretation of Christology, not as a transformative changing of the worlds, but as the appearance of a new form that was to replace the old form. A new religion to replace the old religion. And that's how it started. And then once you make Christology a form, an institutional form from the beginning, you have set it up to be a religion called Christianity, and it is doomed to division. Because you can only have division in the realm of form. You cannot divide formlessness, which was the understanding of Jesus and all the apostles regarding the nature of God and Spirit. God and Spirit are in the realm and space of that which is formless. They have no boundaries. And so why should we think that the nature of our identity, we humans, should have boundaries between us when our nature comes from God as source, and that is the nature of the God revealed in the biblical narrative? Why should that be? So, for 2,000 years, people have been programmed to accept this as just the way things are. I mean, if you ask anyone out there, is Christianity divided? Just ask the question, do you think Christianity is divided? The response would be something, I'm guessing, to the effect of, you got to be kidding me. Of course it is. However, Christians have been programmed to just accept this. They just accept it. Yeah, that's the way it is. Yeah, there's denominations. Yeah, we're divided. Yeah, there's statistics that show all of the many ways we're divided and all of the different ways that we have our own buildings and our own places of worship, and we have our own authoritarian hierarchies and this, that, and the other. It's just accepted, programmed that way. So, again, in episode 2 here, I'm really just starting to set the table, set the stage for the current situation of our day. And I want to say in closing that I'm excited about this situation, because this situation that we live in today has to come in order for us to be part of a birthing process, a movement, an evolutionary leap into a more integrated understanding of an integrated God, and to take down the walls that stand between us as human beings, almost, 7.6, 8 billion, I don't know how many now, and move us further along the path toward unity and the things that we so long for right now and wonder if it could ever be. I'm excited because I believe the models, such as spiral dynamics, have been pointing to this for a long time and telling us this is exactly what's going to happen, and now it really is. And it makes so much more sense to me when I study the biblical narrative. So much more sense. That's why I want to continue to talk in these sessions, current events, what's happening on the planet, not just here in the United States. I'm talking about in every country of the world. So I guess I will leave it there for today. I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate all the feedback that you all have given me. And please continue to do so. Feel free to share your thoughts, etc. And we'll pick it up next time, episode 3, next week. Until then, hope everybody out there has a great week. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@presence.tv. You can also visit our website at presence.tv or find us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.